Everyone says that I sound like AI, and some say that these scripts seem like they've been written by AI. Well, let's put that latter bit to the test today by having ChatGPT write us a video. Last week, I asked it to write a 1,000-word script for a William Spaniel video about how a war could start between Russia and Finland. I skimmed it briefly to make sure that it would be suitable, but now 10 days after the fact, I am here to read it with fresh eyes and tell you just how bad AI is at doing high-level political analysis. And with that, let's go. Intro music, William on screen. Already wrong on 2 accounts. No music on this channel, and the last thing I want to be in my life is a talking head, so I am not on screen. William Spaniel. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode where we explore real-world conflicts using game theory. I would never start a video that way. Today, we're diving into a topic that is on the minds of many in the international community. Could a war start between Russia and Finland? And if so, what game theoretic dynamics could trigger such a conflict? Okay, we're already starting to see ChatGPT fail to understand who I am. It's mixing 2 separate segments of my career together. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, I spent most of my time online creating game theory educational materials. The reason being is that I spend most of my real career focusing on teaching people game theory so that we can use it to study international relations later. As a result, I have a large back catalog dedicated to that. You can see on the side of the screen now some examples of what that looks like. But what ChatGPT seems to be doing here is taking how I would do those videos and then applying it to how I've been writing videos more recently, which is not working out at all. Let's read the second paragraph and you'll understand what I mean. Now, to be clear, Finland and Russia are not at war, and we hope that they never will be. But understanding the strategic landscape is key to grasping how these situations evolve, especially with recent changes like Finland joining NATO. So let's break it down using game theory. Okay, that is not an interesting hook at all. That might keep your attention, given that you're currently on a channel that's called Lines on Maps Extra, but that is not going to get someone who is uninterested in the subject and doesn't already know what I do to be interested in this video. It's a terrible, terrible introduction. Then again, the next thing up is historical context, which is the type of thing that I might be doing next in a video. First, let's look at the historical context, because understanding the background is crucial. Finland shares a long border with Russia, about 1,300 kilometers. Historically, these 2 countries have had their tensions. In the early 20th century, Finland was part of the Russian Empire until it declared independence in 1917. Later, during the Winter War of 1939 to 1940, the Soviet Union invaded Finland, leading to heavy losses on both sides. Despite the war, Finland maintained its independence, but ceded some territory to the Soviets. This is okay so far, which makes sense because what ChatGPT is fairly good at doing is just writing down basic historical facts. So if there was going to be any part of this video that was going to be good, it is this. This part does not require very much creativity. The problem here, both for ChatGPT and a lot of what you see on YouTube more broadly, is basically a book report about what someone read on Wikipedia. And I think that's probably what we're going to be seeing in these next 2 paragraphs. Since then, Finland has navigated a careful balancing act between the East and West, staying neutral during the Cold War and maintaining good relations with both Russia and NATO. But recently, Finland officially joined NATO in 2023, which dramatically shifts the security dynamics in the region. This has potentially escalated tensions with Russia, especially given Russia's concerns about NATO expansion. Well, no, it has not potentially escalated tensions with Russia. It has outright escalated tensions with Russia, and I am not sure why there is any confusion there. Anyway, so with that historical context in mind, let's turn to the central question. Could a war break out between Russia and Finland? And if so, why? And if there are not lines on maps in what follows, this is going to be a very shoddy video indeed. But that takes us to the next section, which is key players and preferences. I can already tell you that this is something that I would never do in a video, but here we go anyway. From a game theory perspective, we begin by identifying the key players and their preferences. The main actors here are Finland, which now has NATO backing, Russia, which has a history of being very sensitive to NATO's eastward expansion, NATO, particularly the United States, which plays a key role in shaping European security policies. Okay, this is getting further and further away from me and sounding more and more like a term paper, to the point that I wonder just how many term papers that ChatGPT has read and is learning from and using and how it's producing this sort of stuff. But that aside, let's simplify this into two key players for now, Russia and Finland, with NATO serving as Finland's strategic backup. Both players have clear preferences. Okay, this is bad from a narrative perspective. You have Finland, then Russia, then NATO, but it's not NATO, it's actually the United States. But now we're going to talk about Finland and Russia, and we're going to ignore NATO because Finland is just going to have that as its strategic backup. That is a whole bunch of logical loops. Either introduce NATO and keep NATO in this, or don't introduce NATO at all, and then introduce NATO later on when it does become important. Don't have the reader or the viewer go through a roller coaster ride because you want clarity, you don't want undulation and confusion. Finland's preferences. Finland prefers to maintain its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and peaceful relations with Russia. Now, with its NATO membership, Finland also wants to avoid any direct military conflict that would invoke Article 5, NATO's Collective Defense Clause. Russia's preferences. Russia, on the other hand, values its security buffer zones, and it perceives NATO's presence along its borders as a threat. Russia has shown in recent years, most notably with Ukraine, that it's willing to take aggressive action when it feels encircled by NATO. Well, that's not a word that I would use, and I don't think anyone in Russia would use it either. Encirclement requires being around in a circle, and NATO countries are only on Russia's western border. Russia would prefer a scenario where Finland remains outside NATO, or at the very least, doesn't pose a significant military threat. However, Finland's membership in NATO changes Russia's calculus. From Moscow's perspective, Finland's NATO membership means that if Finland were to get involved in a conflict with Russia, it could draw in the rest of NATO. Well, we are about 7 minutes into this, and I don't think that ChatGPT has said anything insightful at all. Let's hope that this third section, called The Security Dilemma and Game Theoretic Setup, might be better. Now let's add the concept of the security dilemma into our game theory setup. This is just unnecessarily jargony. Into our game theory setup? That's just a silly phrase, don't use that. A security dilemma occurs when one country takes defensive measures that are perceived as threatening by another country. In this case, Finland's decision to join NATO might be seen by Finland as a defensive move, an insurance policy against Russian aggression. But from Russia's point of view, it looks like Finland is aligning itself with a hostile alliance. In game theory terms, both countries are stuck in a prisoner's dilemma. And of course they're stuck in a prisoner's dilemma because the thing that is written about the most online about game theory is a prisoner's dilemma. And so what is ChatGPT training itself on? Things about prisoner's dilemmas. And so what does it think everything is? A prisoner's dilemma. Maybe you detected a little bit of frustration in my voice. Well, if so, it is because one of the things that I assign to undergrads are simple 2x2 games, and ask them whether this thing is a prisoner's dilemma or not. And when I feed that sort of assignment into ChatGPT, what does it think everything is? Well, it thinks it's a prisoner's dilemma, because ChatGPT thinks everything is a prisoner's dilemma, regardless of whether it actually is. Anyway, here is the basic structure. Finland's strategy. Strengthen its defenses, potentially station NATO troops on its soil, and coordinate closely with NATO. Russia's strategy. Increase its military presence on the border, ramp up aggressive rhetoric, or even preemptively escalate to test NATO's resolve. The catch is that both countries would prefer to avoid conflict, but they each fear that the other side will make the first aggressive move, prompting them to adopt a more aggressive stance themselves. This is the crux of the security dilemma. Even though both Russia and Finland prefer peace, the uncertainty about each other's intentions can drive them toward a more conflictual path. Okay, rant time. This is atrocious. This is not how prisoners' dilemmas work. For one thing, Prisoner's dilemmas require 2 strategies for each player. And what does ChatGPT give us here? Finland strategy, a single strategy listed. Russia strategy, a single strategy listed. If you really want to set this up as a prisoner's dilemma, you should explicitly give each of them 2 strategies, one conflictual and one cooperative. But aside from that, it gets the analysis completely wrong. It thinks that the reason that cooperation fails in a prisoner's dilemma is the fear that the other side will make the first aggressive move. That is not the case at all. The reason that cooperation fails in a prisoner's dilemma is that regardless of what the other person chooses to do, I am better off choosing the conflictual strategy than choosing the cooperative strategy. So even if the other person locks in a cooperative action, and I can publicly observe that, I am still going to take the conflictual action in response. Likewise, the preferences are the same for the other person. Regardless of what I am doing, they prefer to take the conflictual action instead of the cooperative action. As a result, it's conflict and conflict for both of us. Zooming out and taking a deep breath, serenity now. The reason that this is so frustrating is that this is literally the type of thing that I will cover in the first 2 weeks of a class, of an intro class, and ChatGPT fails it spectacularly. Next topic here, signaling and misperception. So actually, this is indicating something else to me, that what ChatGPT is doing is taking buzzwords and creating sections out of each of those buzzwords. So this is probably not going to be getting any better. Next, let's bring in the concept of signaling. In game theory, players send signals to communicate their intentions. These signals can be truthful or deceptive, and misinterpreting a signal can have disastrous consequences. Finland joining NATO is a signal to Russia that Finland is serious about its security. NATO's commitment under Article 5 is another strong signal. It says, if you attack us, you'll be fighting the entire alliance. Okay, if this is where you want to go with the script, that is fine. But you need to have some level of discussion about how there's differential costs or differential risks associated with Finland taking those actions. If there are no differential costs or differential risks, then weaker or unresolved types of Finland could just as easily take these actions, and then Russia should learn nothing about them because there is no differential cost or differential risk associated with bluffing. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's see if ChatGPT will get there. But here's the problem. Russia may misinterpret Finland's defensive posturing as offensive. If Russia believes that Finland, with NATO's backing, might be preparing for an attack or trying to encircle it, Russia could respond preemptively. Misperceptions about the other side's intent, something that we call incomplete information in game theory, could lead both sides to escalate their military readiness. Okay, this is getting a little bit all over the place, but let's see if we can understand where they're trying to go with this with the 4th paragraph. To avoid this, Finland and NATO would need to send very clear signals that their moves are purely defensive. However, Russia might doubt the credibility of those signals, particularly after seeing NATO's actions elsewhere, such as in the Baltics and Poland. Okay, now I understand what it was trying to do, but this is not a good way to do it at all. The mental model that ChatGPT has here in mind is that Russia is unsure about whether Finland is a peace-loving type or some sort of aggressive type that really just wants to screw over Russia at the first possible moment. Meanwhile, the problem for Russia is that Russia observes Finland joining NATO and has to figure out what that says about Finland's underlying type. That's fine. There is a literature on that subject. I have contributed a paper to that literature. But the way that it is still treating the problem is as though there is some sort of magical way to snap your fingers and signal the quote-unquote right intent. And look, maybe that is possible, but right now it reads as though, hey, there's an easy button, press the easy button and things will be easy, rather than telling us how to construct the easy button, which is actually the hard part. But let's move on. How about flashpoints and escalation pathways? Ooh. Actually, looking at that header down below, I am beginning to suspect that we will not have any lines on maps today. Let's pour one out for a second. Okay. So, where might a conflict between Russia and Finland actually start? Let's walk through some potential flashpoints. Actually, you know what? I frame videos like this. It would have happened a little bit earlier on, but if you go back and watch that 92-minute Lines on Maps extravaganza about China and Taiwan, there is a section on flashpoints. The entire thing, though, that has to make or break this is whether at the end of this, we learn that substantive disagreements do not explain why wars happen, and instead, say it with me, you need a substantive disagreement and a bargaining friction to explain war. I'm guessing we're just going to get the first, and we're not going to get an explicit statement about that second bit. First, consider the Arctic. Both Finland and Russia have strategic interests in the Arctic, where climate change is opening new shipping routes and access to valuable resources. Increased competition in the region could lead to small skirmishes, which might escalate into broader conflict. Alright, we've hit the elementary explanation for why wars happen once again. There's some sort of shiny object out there that both sides want, and so they fight a war to see who will actually get it. And yeah, you and I could name a whole bunch of wars that were fought over some natural resource. The thing is, though, that there's a whole bunch of other natural resources out there that were either directly in dispute or could have potentially been in dispute that were instead negotiated over. And it turns out this latter category of negotiations is far more common than the war situations. Thing is, though, that wars produce lots of big bangs, and so we see those things in the news, and we don't yet hear very much about what goes on when two sides peacefully resolve some sort of dispute between them. Anyway, back to this. Another potential flashpoint is cyber warfare. Both Russia and Finland have advanced cyber capabilities, and in today's world, a cyber attack can quickly spiral into a larger military confrontation. A Russian cyber attack on Finland's critical infrastructure, or vice versa, could lead to retaliatory strikes and, ultimately, military conflict. That just reads like someone looked at the news today and decided that cyber attacks were a cool thing to talk about. Finally, we have the miscalculation scenario. Let's say Russia moves troops closer to the Finnish border as a show of strength, and Finland responds by mobilizing its own forces. This could set off a spiral where both sides feel compelled to escalate, and what started as posturing turns into a real conflict. From a game theory perspective, this is a classic escalation game, where both players are afraid of backing down, because doing so would signal weakness. But by continuing to escalate, they increase the risk of war. Well, from an actual game theorist, a game theory perspective would tell you that war is costly, and as a consequence, there exists a range of settlements that both sides, in theory, should prefer to war, and that any explanation for why a war occurs must first resolve that inefficiency puzzle. And you can see that we're not going to be getting answers to any of that because the next thing is the role of NATO and deterrence. Hey, but good news, the conclusion is down here, so our pain will be over soon enough. Now, let's bring NATO back into the equation. Finland's membership in NATO significantly alters the payoff structure for both sides. NATO's presence induces a strong deterrent factor. If Finland were attacked, NATO would be obliged to come to its defense under Article 5. That's actually not true. What would be the case is that they would meet and then decide what to do, and it would be up to each individual state to decide whether and how to defend Finland. It's a common misperception, and it's not surprising that ChatGPT is repeating that nonsense. This means that the cost of any potential conflict for Russia becomes astronomically higher, as it would be facing not just Finland, but potentially the United States, the UK, Germany, and other NATO allies. In game theory terms, this is a powerful deterrence equilibrium. Game theorist here, deterrence equilibrium isn't a phrase that we would commonly use. If Russia knows that attacking Finland will lead to an overwhelming response from NATO, it's likely to avoid any aggressive moves. However, for deterrence to work, NATO's commitment must be credible. If Russia doubts NATO's resolve or sees internal divisions within the alliance, it may believe that it can get away with a limited strike without triggering a full NATO response. That excerpt might be the best that ChatGPT had to offer today. So what's the bottom line? While the risk of war between Russia and Finland remains low, the situation is fragile due to the security dilemma, signaling problems, and potential flashpoints like the Arctic and cyber warfare. Game theory teaches us that even when both sides prefer peace, misperceptions and strategic competition can push them toward conflict. The key to avoiding this outcome is clear communication and credible deterrence. The phrasing here is odd. Game theory teaches us. Game theory is a method of studying something. It's like statistics. Game theory doesn't tell you something specifically, a model tells you something. Just like statistics doesn't tell you something, but a model that uses statistics tells you something. You wouldn't say statistics teaches us that when both sides prefer peace, misperceptions and blah blah blah. You wouldn't do that. And similarly here, you would not say that game theory teaches us anything. It's not the game theory that's teaching us something, it's the model that uses game theory that teaches us something. Okay, overall, this is C-level material, or, with grade inflation as it is now, B-level material. It is the type of thing that an undergraduate who reads the news, but either never came to class or was sleeping through lecture, would be able to produce in one night. So it sounds like it's intelligent, but anyone who actually knows what's going on would tell you that this is kind of junk. A lot of it sounds like it was written from the 1980s, and that, again, makes sense because a lot of what ChatGPT draws from in this literature comes from that time period. And as a result, it is just trying to regurgitate what it has read before, just with Finland and Russia and maybe like cyber attacks in the Arctic thrown in for fun. But you can see that we're going to end this with another failure because the final paragraph says, "Thanks for tuning in, and if you found this analysis interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe for more game theory breakdowns of real-world issues. See you next time." Outro music. In contrast, what it should say is, "Meanwhile, if you like the normal outros, then you'll love my books on the war. Check the video description for more information about them. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, this time to the Lines on Maps extra channel. And I'll see you next time. Take care."